My question to you, sir, being a representative of PSUK, what happens if a box of drugs scans in my dispensary as false once your delivery driver has left?
Okay. Mr. Preston.
Thanks for that one, yeah. It's an interesting one for all of us, isn't it? But actually the responsibility at that point is not to not to send it back to your wholesaler. It seems like the obvious thing to do, doesn't it? But actually what's happening then is you're going to move stock which potentially has a problem around the supply chain. What we do with the stock then is quarantine the stock. That's the most important thing. It should not be supplied to a patient. This is assuming that we're getting a stolen or a really bad response, not a not found on file. Not found on file we will have thousands of. Not found on file can't link the two products together in terms of the batch number and the expiry date. Those you continue to dispense as normal. Those are just normal products. There are going to be thousands of them, many, many, many times more of those in the market than products that are actually FMD products. So please dispense those normally. If there is a true problem with the product, the most important thing is protection of the patient. And what we must do then is quarantine the product, keep that product safe, separate, so it cannot be dispensed, cannot be given by accident to a patient. And then we fill in the yellow card. It's a painful process. We're going to get some more guidance. The MHA assures us on yellow card, but fill in the yellow card. After that, there's a time after that when you think about the commercial aspects of all of that, and that might be one I'll hand back to Ian again nicely, but actually there are commercials that have to happen later. Most times though, you find that the product things will be resolved. I think what we're going to find most things in the start, certainly the early stage of FMD, is going to be a mistake rather than the real problem. But we need to ascertain that first. The first thing that must happen is the stock's quarantined and the product's kept safe. Let's make sure no patients get that stock. That is the fundamental first thing to do. And remember, actually, that you won't scan most products as you receive it. FMD doesn't mean we scan things in. It means we scan things out. So it might be 2 years after you receive it before you scan it. Very bad stock management, but I used to work in pharmacy and yeah.
Sorry, could you clarify that for everyone else in here, because I didn't quite take that in. Are you, sir, saying that we do not have to scan into the system for the new regulation when we receive stock other than our normal process?
That observation is absolutely 100% correct. You do not have to scan product in.
I have a follow-up question.
You scan product out.
The commercial aspect, sir. If we do have one that's incorrect, are we going to be reimbursed by the wholesaler?
I think that depends really. There's lots of discussion going on with that right now, and it would depend on the nature of the falsified event. Mm-hmm. It really depends, and I don't think we can give you a straight answer on what would happen in every single situation, because it would depend why that has ended up in the position that it's in.
Yeah, and I think just in relation to that, I think it's one of those where we've got to work it through, so it'll go on to the rolling FAQ. There's a pragmatic side of me that's thinking one thing commercially that you would do in relation to your customer relationship, but we just need to make sure that we've got that one absolutely ironed out. So I think we'll, rather than sort of make it up on the hoof, we'll go away and clarify it and make sure that you've all got the same answer. Okay.
But just for absolute clarity, everybody understands we do not have to scan it goods in. You're not scanning as you receive the product, you're scanning it as you give it to someone.
Actually, it's still slightly on that topic. At the wholesalers side of things, when they deliver them to us, they're having to scan it out as well, is that right? No.
No.
So,
a wholesaler has got a number of different responsibilities. Our responsibility actually as a wholesaler, I talk because most of my job is wholesale. As a wholesaler, we have to verify product, and it's a risk-based verification. And actually what that means is that if we buy it directly from the manufacturer or a designated representative of the manufacturer, then actually we don't need to scan it at all at goods in. But what we do have to scan, if we buy product that we don't buy from the manufacturer, so often in the wholesale market, a wholesaler will buy from another wholesaler. And if we buy from another wholesaler, we will have to verify that stock at goods in. But wholesaler will not scan out. So the wholesaler won't know which packs they sold you. We'll know that we sold you 100 boxes of product, but we won't know what the serial numbers are. There are odd occasions that we might do for very, very specific patients, but actually no dispensing doctors. There's a group of customers called Article 23, but no dispensing doctors in Article 23 where we would have to decommission on their behalf. But apart from that, we will not scan out as a matter of course. So actually a wholesaler won't know which actual packs. We'll know we sold 100 packs, but we know which 100 packs we won't know.
Yeah, once we've filled the yellow card in, what are we doing with that? And what about the pack? Do we get reimbursed or anything?
I think it's a very similar answer to the lady before. I think that, as Ian said, I think that we need to all understand that better. I don't think there's an awful lot of clarity in the market about actually what will happen. And I say it depends what the reason for it is. Who supplied it? How did it get supplied? What happened might depend how that payment process is.
Yeah, if it's already used pack.
Well, already used, again, clearly something's gone terribly wrong there.
Yeah,
and
no,
the investigation would be where that already used had occurred.
Yeah, who would have to investigate that? Would it be the practice?
The practice would report that on the yellow card, and that would be up to the regulator, who would be actually, in that case, the MHRA.
Yeah, so you know the yellow card, what would we do with it? Do we know?
So,
You know the yellow card?
Yeah.
What are we doing with it once we've filled it in?
It's actually, the yellow card now is online. So essentially it's an online form to fill out, and you find there's lots of different tabs on the yellow card, because you can report an adverse event, you can report a patient safety incident, you can report all sorts of things on there. And it's what it's really designed for, in all honesty. They've kind of cobbled a little bit on the end that talks about falsified medicines. And on that, you'll then you give a few details about the product, what the batch number is, what the serial number was, what the expiry date was, what the product was, when did you identify that product as being falsified, and click send, and they'll send it off. And you'll have a response in whichever time they choose to have. It's also important to say, though, when you get an adverse scan, so does the regulator. So if you have a product that comes up stolen, the regulator will immediately know that you've got a product that's tagged as stolen, and they'll see where, when, and all of the other details. So it's not just you that sees that bad scan, somebody else sees it as well. The regulator will see that, and they'll be expecting to see the corresponding yellow card entry for that product. And so it's really, really important, if I can re-stress this again, if you do ever have, and please let's hope we don't have it, but if you do ever have that, please don't put that product back in supply chain. Don't send it back to your wholesaler. All we're doing is putting risky product in supply chain. The risk is it gets to one of my operatives and goods in, and they miss it, and we put it back in supply chain. It's really important that product is quarantined and kept safe. Patients first. My rule of having work is, first rule is, let's not kill anyone. Let's make sure that product is safe and kept safe.
Thanks. I've got two questions on slightly different themes. The first being, you talked about IT. I'm a GP, and GP IT systems are commissioned by NHS England, and therefore is it out with our gift to choose when the NHS England pay for our systems, and will it be their responsibility to actually fund this, given that this is new legislation? So that's the first question. And the second question is to do with personally administered items. So at the point of, you talk about at what point the products are decommissioned. Can they be decommissioned early, as in when they arrive in the practice, or are they going to have to be decommissioned at the point that they're given to the patient?
I think if I take the second question first, it's probably an easier question to answer than the first one. The first one is a complex piece. If you think about personally administered items, every prescription-only medicine which is given to a patient needs to be decommissioned, apart from IV bags and radioisotopes. So anything does need to be decommissioned. I think in terms of personally administered items, I think the regulator take a relatively pragmatic approach to about where that point of dispensing is and what the point of supply is. I think that what I wouldn't want to do is to be dispensing it 3 months and decommission it 3 months before I supplied it. But if you decommissioned it 3 days before, because you're going to have a clinic and you're going to decommission all the product for the clinic, I think, based on what I know, I can't promise you this to be the case, I would believe that the regulator take a pragmatic approach to that. I think that's safe and appropriate and reasonable given the circumstances that you're in. Somebody who talked about doctors' bags quite a lot. It's quite an important thing to think about. You're not going to decommission that. You're not, as you're about to inject some salbutamol into someone, you're not going to wait to decommission the product before you do that. You'd imagine as it's put in the bag, you decommission the product. Provided you've got a process to do that and prove that that's what you've actually done with it, then I think everybody would think that that would be compliant and reasonable. I think some of the challenge going around flu clinics and other big clinics as well, that's where there's some real challenge. Family planning clinics could be a little bit of a challenge as well, because those are regular, flu clinics are once a year, FPCs happen all the time. And those are going to be quite a challenge. And think, how do we decommission that product, but retain the safe operation of the clinic itself? And I think providing you've got a written process, you've got something to show that you've thought about it and that you're not too far away, I think you have a fairly pragmatic approach in terms of what the regulator would see in that particular case. In the case, if we try and answer the first question now, because I think that was the second one was the easy question to answer, the first one I think is much more complex. NHS Digital, as you know just now, are re-tendering for the contract to run GP systems all over. Unfortunately, I think that's going to take quite a little bit more time than we have in terms of FMD compliance. And all of us, like it or not, share that responsibility that the law changes on Saturday. I think we need to be careful that I appreciate that who pays for what and all those things that perhaps isn't answered. Pharmacy has exactly the same questions. Who's going to pay for all this? Because you've got to scan every unit, you've got to have all these things to happen, you've got to think about how it all works. I think the added complication in the world of GP practices particularly is because of the changes with NHS Digital going on right now. But if you've engaged your supplier and you know what they've got to provide, if your supplier already has something that they can provide, I think we've got to make sure that we comply with the law first. We might have to argue about the money later. And I think Matthew at DDA might disagree with me in that particular point, but that's kind of where we are in my view.
Yeah, I would agree, and I don't think that you can add any more beyond that in terms of there is no defined, yes, there's going to be reimbursement. I think there's lots of discussion, but at this point there's no definitive. So I think you have to then control the controllable that John's talked about in relation to Secure Med, getting the link done, etc. But I'm pretty much convinced that debate will rumble for some time soon.
Hi, I'm Carolyn, Practice Manager in a dispensing practice. I think just a little bit of clarity on your comment that we don't scan our stock in anymore. I think there's two elements here. There's FMD, which is the traceability of the drugs. There's also our stock control systems. So there was a lot of people looking around the room table going, really? We will still be scanning into our stock, but we appreciate we're not doing an FMD process, RA. So we're still scanning in, we're still scanning out. That runs alongside the FMD process. But it was interesting. I thought when FMD first came out, it was going to follow that drug through its entire journey. So you've clarified that, and that helps. So the only time that we are doing anything to do with FMD is when we decommission it. All our stock control carries on as before, and I'm hoping System 1 manages that seamlessly.
You might also choose to scan it goods in. You might want to verify scan it goods in just to check the product's okay if you want to.
If we had the time.
If you had the time. And that's the bit that when you look at this, and I've said it time and time again, and I said I've been in the press about this, and been really careful that we don't lose. For me, the IT cost and the IT investment is actually dwarfed by the people cost in doing this, the operational change, to think of how things differently. You've got to scan every unit, and that's fine. Good scans are good, bad scans not so clever. And remember, lots of the bad scans are just it's not found, but somebody's going to have to look at that and decide, is it just because it's not found, or is it actually a problem? And again, if your system already requires you to scan in for your stock, please don't stop doing that. But FMD doesn't require you to do that. Okay?
I'd just like to check. I've heard that there's a 10-day window after you've decommissioned if patients don't pick up. But that's sort of very short. If the only practical way I can see to decommission is actually as part of your dispensing or your checking process, when it's going into the bag, not when the patient's actually there, because you'd have a queue all the way down the village. But in practicality, a lot of patients may not pick up within that 10 days, and then what can you do with that stock then? Nothing?
I think it's a good question, actually, because the 10-day rule creates such a lot of question and comment. The 10-day rule isn't about when you can give it to the patient. So you can give it to the patient if you decommission it for that patient. Now, at the time of supply to the patient, I think the regulator might be a little bit difficult with you on that. However, if you've genuinely decommissioned it for that patient and they didn't pick it up for 11 days, that doesn't matter. What it does matter, though, is if you do decommission it for that patient yeah, and they don't pick it up, so it's not entered their control, so it has to stay in your control, you can recommission the product to add it back to stock. So you can take the label off and recommission it back to stock. And you've got 240 hours from the second that it was decommissioned to do that. It's not 10 days, it's not a nice flexible, I'll speak to my wholesaler and see if they'll do something nice for me. It is 240 hours from the time that you decommission it that you can recommission it and add it back into stock in your dispensary. So it's not about when you can give it to the patient, it's about how long has passed before you can add it back to stock again. And please remember, if you've given it to the patient, it's already too late, because that's left the legitimate supply chain.
If they don't actually come for it and you ring them up and say, we've got this bag, and they say, oh no, I've changed my mind, I don't want it, and it's after 10 days, then that stock's wasted, basically.
Stock is wasted, yeah. Just if I could add a little bit on that as well. You can recommission where we've decommissioned for supply. So we've supplied it to a patient. If the product is damaged, you cannot recommission it. So be careful if you mark it as damaged, because you cannot recommission a damaged product.
Hi. With regard to part packs, I understand that you decommission when you dispense it out to the patient, but then you can dispense the remaining part of the pack until the end expiry date. So my question would be why can't we decommission everything as part packs? And because then we can use it as we do now until the end date.
If you wanted to make that part of your process, I think you're circumventing the intention of the regulation, but there's no reason that you couldn't do that. You know, so if you decide to give everybody 27 instead of 28, you could.
Because basically, we are then becoming the end user instead of the patient. And what I'm doing currently isn't any different to that with before FMD. I could verify the pack when it came into the practice to make sure that it is compliant medication and decommission at the same point, and then my stock is free to use to whoever can I not do that?
No is the short answer, because you have to decommission at the time of supply to the patient, unless it's a split pack.
But it doesn't make sense, you see. If you can do that for a split pack, why can't you do it for a whole pack, which is surely safer than with a split pack?
I didn't make the rules.
It's a nonsense.
If I give you another example, a hospital is a healthcare institution, and a hospital may decommission the pack at any time before it's supplied to the patient. So a hospital can decommission it on entry, which might mean it might be 3 years until the pack is dispensed and given to a patient, and we have no further check in that time, which for me does the same thing. But unfortunately, the law is what the law is, and it says that unless the pack is a split pack, that you have to decommission at the time of supply. And the time of supply is a moot point, because there is no fundamental definition of that, and we probably don't want one, because it might not be what we wanted to hear.
Well, for example, I don't keep very much stock on my shelf at all, and for pricing purposes, basically, and storage. But so I know that my turnover is frequent, and I'm not going to be keeping stock on my shelf for, sort of a year, 2 years, or whatever. And it's just sort of like, at what point can you fudge things?
I'll leave that in your very capable hands. I think for me, the legislation is relatively clear, and I think it is just. But what isn't clear is that time of supply, and there's lots of interpretation of that. Is it as you dispense the product? Is it as you hand the product out? And you've got to think about some of the risk that comes into things, because clearly if the product's recalled and you've decommissioned it 3 months ago, you might not know it was recalled when it's handed to the patient. And most recalls are relatively trivial and probably cause no patient harm. But every now and again, there's something that happens, and there's that risk. And of course, it's all about risk, because we can never take risk away from anything that we do. But it's about kind of balancing the risk between for the patient at both ends of the debate.
But there isn't any greater risk than how we're operating at the moment, and we buy through bona fide wholesalers. I have to say, it's news to me today that the wholesaler aren't verifying it through their system. I assumed that the wholesaler would be verifying it through their system.
The wholesalers we will verify for products that we don't buy from directly from the manufacturer.
So what about PIs? Sorry, I know I'm monopolising things here, but what about PIs?
PI, if we buy direct from the PI manufacturer themselves, you know, the over-labeller, in the laws, in the eyes of the FMD regulations, PIs, the person who actually does the over-labelling is the manufacturer.
So they'll upload it to the system?
So they'll upload it to the system, and it depends whether we buy it directly, because PIs are very, very highly traded. So it's quite possible that we don't buy it from the actual manufacturer, we buy it from another wholesaler, because they tend to consolidate stocks and all sorts of other things like that. So it would depend on the path of that PI, as with any product, any generic or branded product, be exactly the same. Depends on the path of the product, would depend whether the wholesaler would verify or not.
So if I was to do the repeat prescription for a patient, they're not here, they've got 2 days normally to collect it. So I've done the repeat prescription, I've scanned all the items, they all have had the check and they look okay. I understand that I'm going to get some kind of extra barcode label on the bag. Whether I decide to decommission it at that point or not, if I was to put it in a drawer for the patient to collect, and if they came and I scanned it out, why would it have a problem a few days later?
If you verified it, you're probably okay. If you verified it as you dispensed it. It depends whether you verified it as you dispense it or not. And some systems will verify as you dispense, others will just collect the barcodes. So if it verifies and clears, had a look at the system, and it's only a couple of days ago, so the chances are nothing's changed in status.
Because I don't know if I can train my patients to be here within 10 days.
Remember though that 10 days, they don't have to collect it within 10 days, it just means you can't recommission it. That's the important point. For me, I would decommission it as close as you can to supply, then it allows you more chance to recover the stock should they not collect.
My other question is some patients come and they've just seen the doctor and the doctor just changed their medication, and therefore the stuff they got in the bag, they want to take some of the items out because they've changed it and they've changed the strength or something. So what do I do then?
You can recommission packs individually.
Okay.
So each individual pack, you can say that, you know, we've changed the Bendros to furosemide, so we're going to have furosemide instead. You can decommission the furosemide and recommission the Bendros. Every system should be able to do that.
And my last question is, in the doctor's surgery, we have an emergency bag and it has drugs in it for, obviously, emergencies. So if a doctor needs to give it to a patient, am I supposed to somehow decommission it?
The recommendation is in that situation, or what we understand is, because nothing's written down on this, is that there'd be a pragmatic approach taken to that. So I would expect that most doctors' bags or emergency bags, whatever you want to call that particular bag, would be decommissioned at the point you put it into the bag.
Okay.
I mean, there is risk with that, but I think there's relative risk. You can't have somebody in the field, as I said before, trying to administer a salbutamol injection to somebody who's got breathing problems, and at the same time kind of expect them to decommission it first before they do that.
So you can decommission not to a patient?
You can yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
If you have a standalone system, the standalone system has no connection between the patient and the product. It's just decommissioning the product.
What happens if you forget to decommission the product and you've given it to the patient and they've gone home with it?
You're going to jail.
Pardon? Shall we just work like that? Just forget to decommission?
In fairness, I think the regulator's pretty relaxed about the fact that they know that these things will from time to time happen. I would recommend in the course of the business that I do, we would raise what we call a CAPA, a corrective and preventative action report, to try and make sure that we didn't do it again. And I think whatever you call that report, some sort of incident report, would be a sensible thing to do at that point, because what you want to try and do is try and stop it happening again rather than worry about. I wouldn't go chasing the patient down the street.
Hi there, Andy King from Leeds Road in Harrogate. You mentioned about the decommissioning. And the time lag between we're going to get the IT and everything else. There's going to be drugs that we're receiving in practice that are FMD compliant and they'll have everything on it, but we won't have systems. SecureMed will have thousands of drugs on their system, potentially, that will never be decommissioned. How is that going to be managed? Because surely that's defeating the object.
Yes. what we've got is with FMD is a huge run-in when you think about it, because actually the manufacturers aren't required to upload pack data until Saturday. In fact, lots of them, in fairness, if they've not had their licence granted by the MHRA, maybe 6 months after now before they even start uploading packs. So what we have in the interim time is loads of packs that are there but aren't FMD compliant, with loads of packs that are FMD compliant that nobody's able to decommission. Essentially what will happen with those is once they reach their expiry date, they'll fall off the system, but there is no method for them to, because how would they know they've been supplied to a patient unless somebody decommissioned it? The conversation I think all of us will have about FMD in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time is going to be quite different to the one that we're having now. Because in 5 years' time, every single pack will have all the safety features on, providing we don't leave the EU in a difficult way. Every single pack will have the safety features on, and every single pack will be decommissioned. So that'll come to, you'll start to notice gaps, but at the minute they won't notice the gaps because there's so many gaps in the data. So you're absolutely right. The system, I think, this answer to the system would have been to have all the packs being FMD compliant first, have all packs in market FMD compliant, and then end users live. But that's not the way they've chosen to run the system. They've chosen a one hit for the whole system, which makes that exactly, there's going to be huge holes in the data until all the packs come through, all of us become compliant, everybody moves through the process. There's going to be millions of packs that aren't decommissioned.
Yeah, we're just trying to assure there'll be no backward process. Oh, can you manage everything you've issued already?
No, there is no way to know.
I'm just thinking about the logistics of the dispensing process. I can't expect you to be an expert in all of the IT systems, but thinking about integrated systems that produce an aggregated barcode, if I'm dispensing a 5-item script and I've only got 3 items in stock, how's that going to work? Can I not do it until I've got all the items in, at which point that's going to make it rather difficult for me to do my job?
The way that the systems I've seen, and I can't obviously speak for every system because there are 130 systems on the market for FMD, so lots of systems out there. But the systems that I've seen, you can associate a product to that aggregate. If we're talking about aggregated code system, you can associate at any point to that aggregated system. So you do the 3 items you've got in your hand, you leave the orange slip in the basket with the stock or whichever you choose to do, and as you dispense the final 2 packs, you would associate those again with that 2D barcode.
I know the table at the back told me before you had loads of questions, so you've been...
You've already answered most of them. Are flus definitely included, even though pharmacists can give flus without a prescription?
The pharmacist is working on a PGD, so it's a prescription-only medicine that they're given without a prescription. So actually, they will have to be decommissioned as prescription-only medicine. Any prescription-only medicine, other than the radioisotopes and things like that, it's not a pharmacy medicine. It's a prescription-only medicine. It's been dispensed under PGD. So it's just a nuance of the type of supply that it is, but it's the nature of the medicine rather than the person who gives it that's the important piece.
Just one question about, in the magazine it says that some people are trialling the software. Is there anybody in the room that has trialled the software?
Who've tried the software?
No, nobody's admitting to being the guinea pig for the software in the room.
Right, okay, yeah.
Okay. Was that yes?
I have a question to ask.
Oh, right, okay. Right, well, can we come to you in a minute? We're just down the front first, and then there's a microphone coming to you now. So, okay.
How will patients be informed about this new regulation? And because obviously this could potentially slow the process down for them.
It's a really interesting question because actually I actually sit on the comms work stream for the implementation of FMD in the UK with the HSE, and they hadn't really thought about it terribly much. They'd thought about it and kind of thought we'll think about it later, and now we've got very close to implementation. I think they're starting to think that perhaps, so they're talking about producing some posters and things like that we might be able to display in whichever type of practice you have, just to try and explain what's going on. I think the danger is, though, is that we don't want to over-inform the patient either, because what we don't want the patient trying to do is try and scan the products themselves and trying to do anything else that might come with that too. So I think they're in fairness to them, trying to be quite pragmatic about what it is that we do tell patients. I think that, certainly, I know that my colleagues in Rowlands are working on a little poster that's going to go up in the Rowlands pharmacies to say, there's a new process in the dispensary. Please bear with us if something takes a little bit longer. That's probably a great... So you might want to think about something that you might produce yourselves actually as well, because there's not an awful lot coming out from government on it.
Yeah, just actually, that's a question from me, I guess, just thinking with marketing hat on. So would something of that nature, i.e. a poster for patients for the practice, be a useful thing to have? Yeah, okay, right. Cool. Right. Have you got the mic now? Yeah.
Yes, I have the mic. Thank you very much. Trying to think how to phrase this question. Yes. How do we get more information? Will there be other events like this available with updates? Because I'm just one person from a 25-member of staff practice, and they will view processes in different ways. Doctors will have different questions. Nurses, are you offering a free of cost in-house teaching session or webinars or etc.? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I think in terms of ongoing information, I would say our website, so the PS UK website homepage will be the place to go, because that will be the most up-to-date and current information source. So there is, as I said before, when you go into the homepage, we put an FMD bar on the top. And actually, if you go in there, that will just constantly update, and we'll ensure that the FAQs document in there is rolling. So we'll just we'll keep adding to it. The one of webinars is a brilliant question, and actually, it's something that I am desperately trying to champion within our organisation at the moment, because I believe it's a great way to go, because actually it means that we can get information very quickly out to an audience wherever it may be. We're just not IT there yet, but watch this space, because I think that would be the way to go. The other bit that I would say is, look, continue to engage your account manager. So if in your instance it's Catherine, then obviously through Catherine, through the dispensing support team in York, is make sure that you've got anything that's being fed through, because if there's questions of where we're not giving clarity and answers, then as I said before, it'll either be we don't have the answer, or we've just not somehow kind of managed to update and publish it. So just keep the dialogue going, and I liaise very closely. John and I speak or meet very frequently at the moment.
Far too often.
Far too often. There's a bit of feedback for me. You know, we try and cover it in that way. So I think the commitment is to make sure we keep pushing out as much as we can, but just keep talking to us. And actually, if you've got ideas, I think the one from the front about generating a poster for patients, because actually, you know, in a way, we should never forget the end user. And actually, it is the patient, and actually, they're going to be front and centre of what's going on here. And yet, probably in reality, we haven't thought about, let's make sure we can demystify it for them. So that probably answers it as best as I can at this point. And we are investing as much as we can to make sure we inform. Okay.
I say also look at the DHSC's website. Unusually for a government website, it's actually quite helpful. And it's a really thorough list of the different places that you might use.
Yeah. I mean, the other bit just to add as well is that the question came up before about SOPs. John did reference before. So what we are going to look at internally is to see whether we can develop a SOP framework that we can share out with you. So at least you've got something that you can then take and make your own and bring it alive in the practice. But at least we'll try and create a framework, which I know within Newmark, within Rowlands, has been done within Phoenix. So we will look at that from a DD perspective and just send something out and say, look, here's a starter for 10, you can shape it and make it your own.
Hi, mine's about the software. So you said if you use your software for the practice, when you dispense, at point of dispensing and decommissioning, it'll equate to your patient, so you'll know who you've issued the item to. How does that work with personally administered? So if I used my software from the practice software, System 1, will you might not know, but do you think there'll be an option that you can just decommission anonymously, if you like?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the software systems have two options. One where it's kind of linked to the patient, which obviously makes sense for a normally dispensed item, but for PIs and things like that, where you actually might have a different set of circumstances and you might be doing something in bulk, most of the systems we use are just to sort of singularly decommission, if that makes sense, without that. Because you're not required in law to link it to the patient. I mean, I think it makes sense to link it to the patient, but you're not required in law to link the decommission to a particular patient.
When it comes to scanning the barcode, and you said that there'll be quite a few products where it just doesn't go through as it should normally, and that there should be someone in practice who makes the decision whether that product can be given to the patient. Given that it sounds like it's very hit and miss at the moment and still in its infancy, how will we know what we are safe to override and hand out? And what are the red flags we should be looking for?
Yes, it's a good question. I think when you think about it and look at the diagram that I showed before on the screen, it's taken from the FMD source website. It's really useful, I think, because what it shows is those true red card events. You know, if the product comes up and says it's stolen or it's been dispensed in another place, there's something fundamentally wrong there. All of the guidance says, I'm working just now with the HDA and the pharmacy groups and others, I think Matthew's coming to that too, and we're trying to work and make sure that people understand that there can be so many packs that are old packs, pre-FMD packs, or kind of almost part FMD packs, that if you've dispensed it before, you dispense it now. It's only when it comes up with something which is really difficult and really concerning, i.e. stolen or already dispensed, because that is a red card, isn't it? It's already dispensed in another place. Well, how can that be? There's something not right. So anything else other than that, at this minute, if it's product not found, or if it's, you know, you often find that because of the way the manufacturer have loaded data or not loaded data just now, that the barcode doesn't match the GTIN, doesn't match the expiry date because they haven't been bothered, because actually it didn't matter, they've not uploaded anything. You might get strange results coming back from them. Anything which is normal, and you would have dispensed it yesterday, you can dispense it tomorrow, except those really true red card ones, and you'll find it they're really clear, I think, on there. It's kind of stolen, all of those types of things. Other than that, we'll assume. Now, in time, back to I said before, in the gentleman's question over here, in 5 years' time, when everything's settled down, all of the bad codes will need to start to question, because they should be so far and few between. You know, once all the codes are uploaded, all of the packs are FMD compliant, if the batch number doesn't match the expiry date, there's something wrong. Right now, it's probably because the manufacturer's not uploaded the data properly, or not uploaded it in the right format because they didn't have to. So actually, right now, for me, just look at those really key bits, and I think they're actually quite easy to identify. There's not a huge long list of different things you need to be careful of. It's just watching for those true red card things that would make anybody think and to look. And frankly, if you get something else and one pack looks wrong for another reason, you know, if the colour of the pack looks different, if the quality of the cardboard looks different, either better or worse than you normally expect. If you've got another risk factor, it's like everything else with risk factors, and 2 risk factors make you think the risk's gone up. You probably multiply the risk rather than just adding it. So be looking for anything else like that. But I think in most circumstances, in most cases, I'd recommend that let's not have any situations that would cause patient shortages by worrying about unloaded and uploaded packs in the early days. 3 years' time, different story, but not in the early days.
Will somebody tell us when we reach that tipping point? Sorry.
No.
No. Just got to guess.
I think what we'll see is, I think you'll see a ramp up in regulation, though. What you will see in the early days, the regulators, the 3 main regulators, the CQC, the GPHC and the MHRA, I think in the early days will be pragmatic. But we have to be careful with this. It is a system which is designed to reduce the amount of falsified medicines reaching our shores. So at some point they are going to be less pragmatic and less pragmatic. We find that with all of the regulation come as they understand the regulations, and as the regulations start to coalesce, you'll see their view of the regulation becoming more tight. But I don't think there's a specific time or date. I'm not even sure they would say there is such a thing. But
my actual question was about branch surgeries. So we prepare all our repeats at the main surgery and transfer them up to the branch. But we also do surgeries, prescriptions up at the branch. So it's whether we would have to register on SecureMed as a different site.
It's 2 sites.
It is 2 sites. And is that for everything that leaves the building there? Even the ones that are prepared down at the other site?
That's a really good question. And I think that would probably be up to you to decide about this time of supply.
Okay.
And I think, again, I think whatever answer you you settled upon, and you were able to justify that to the CQC when they turn up, I think it probably both would be the right answer. I don't think there is a a defined answer to that question. The time of supply question is always the question that they might ask.
What's the scale of the problem? Why is this come into force? Are we worrying about nothing?
Can I take the Fifth Amendment on the answer to that question? In fairness, in Europe, there have been falsified medicines. We've had all sorts of horror stories. You've seen in Italy, we had problems with Herceptin, where the product was removed from market, stolen. The active ingredient was removed. Then they placed other product into that market and placed it back into it ended up in Romania, then back into Italy again. FMD would probably have caught that, actually, in fairness. There's not been millions of issues with falsified medicines in the legitimate European supply chain. The buying Viagra online supply chain, there are hundreds of thousands of falsified products out there. Buying diazepam online, buying any of these products online, you're going to find lots of falsified product. The actual scale of the problem in the legitimate supply chain, being honest, we don't really know. We know about the ones that have been identified, and these are in probably the mid-teens of events over the last 3 or 4 years. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of events. But the other part of the reality is we won't know until the system's live. Actually, are we sitting on a problem that we don't understand? And we don't know.
I had a couple of questions with regard to waste. Is anybody going to measure the waste that is created by this? Because assuming you do decommission and a patient doesn't collect within the 10 days, you're going to push the script through and destroy the stock. Is there going to be any mechanism for reporting that type of waste? And the second question was around quarantine, really. So we quarantine. Who is mandated to follow that up? Or are you going to sit there and wait for 3 months and wait for 6 months and have a quarantine amount of stock on the shelf waiting for somebody to come and deal with it? Is it going to be the police? Is anyone going to investigate it? Or is it just going to go into a black hole of question mark?
Oh, there's two nice questions. Thank you for those. If I take the second one first, because actually it's quite an interesting one. Depending on the nature of the event will depend what happens next. Because clearly a stolen product needs to be investigated to find out. And essentially the yellow card will report to the MHRA because they're the competent authority, they're the regulatory authority who are responsible for FMD in its finer form in the UK. They'll be responsible then to send that report and they'll have to deal with that report. Now what they do with that report might go to 2 different places. One place is what's called the DMRC, which is Defective Medicines Reporting Centre. So if it's a low-level thing that doesn't look like there's an actual falsification, but there's a problem, it'll go to DMRC to deal with because it's potential defective medicine. It's not in the licence form that it should be. They've got an enforcement agency as well, and it's them that send the emails out, and you see them on the television showing that they've removed the doors from a lock-up garage and things like that. Now, if there's a stolen product or there's a large number of stolen products, depending on the scale of what they see, because remember, they'll see all of the reports, not just your one report, then depending on that, then it might become an enforcement issue. I have to say, I think all of us are quite concerned, wholesalers as well, because we might end up with pallets of stock and actually quite worried about how long, because I don't know if anybody else, I filled a yellow card in some time ago and it took a very, very, very long time till anybody ever got back to me about what I'd written in the yellow card. And I think we're all concerned because we don't know. And we actually don't know how well equipped they are or not to be able to deal with some of those results. And the first question you asked was about waste. And I think the answer is no. We don't know. We don't know. And I don't think there's any particular way of knowing because you're destroying the stock, but the stock's already been decommissioned, so there isn't a second decommission to identify it as a waste destruction. It's just it's waste, and I think that there's some unintended consequences of FMD that we still don't know yet, and that is one of them. And I say the other one for me is about introducing risk by trying to introduce a new process too quickly or doing it wrong, and actually making your practice more risky rather than less risky in the process.
I did have one other question, which was to do with online purchasing of medications. Obviously, there are a cohort of the general public who purchase medications illegally online. Obviously, this isn't going to affect that at all. So how long before there's an app on your smartphone that allows you to actually check the barcode on something that you've bought online?
Well, that's the real concern. We said before there's been no patient comms, because actually what they don't want is that to start to happen, because you can imagine how many different ways people would want to make their product look like it's scanned properly. And that's the real concern, is actually why there's been a very light touch view of talking to the public about this, because what we don't want is a member of the public. In fairness, if they scan a product that you've given them, it should scan as decommissioned. But they shouldn't have access to the website, because we don't want them having access to barcodes to find a good barcode. Because what you don't want is somebody, if you think if you're a counterfeiter, you want to find good barcodes. You don't care what product it is, as long as it's a good barcode. Because if you found a good barcode, you can put it on your product, your counterfeit product.
Last question. Sorry, I've been saving them for you.
Yeah.
Veterinary medicines. Is there going to be a decommissioning of veterinary medicines?
No. Veterinary medicines are outside of the FMD regulations. If you supply a human medicine to a veterinarian or to a retailer of veterinary products, and it is a prescription-only medicine for a human, then you would have to, as a wholesaler, we would have to decommission on that person's behalf. This is about this Article 23 that I'm trying not to talk about too much today because it confuses people. If you supply to a veterinarian who has a wholesale distribution authorisation, then they could still resupply that to the human market, even although they probably don't intend to, but they could. So we could not then decommission on their behalf as a wholesaler. They would need to do that on their own behalf as they supply it further, where they know that it's leaving the human supply chain. But veterinary medicines are not included, apart from human medicines being supplied, and that's where it gets complicated with Article 23.
Just on the rare occasion we get our delivery from PSUK and the stock is damaged and the tamper-proof things are damaged, who do we report that to? PSUK or MHRA? Because the tamper-proof thing's damaged.
If the product is genuinely damaged, it's a damage, like any other damage you would have. You know, that the famous one, isn't it, is there's a bottle of Gaviscon and a Seretide inhaler in the same tote box, and one's rolled over the other. It's a damage.
Yeah. I'm really glad you finished the question as well, because when you got partway through and stopped when you said on the rare occasion we get our delivery from PSUK, I was really panicking at that point. I thought, I hope there's more.
Hi, I'm from Dispensing Doctors, and I'd just like to apologise if you've already covered this with our late arrival. But working in a Dispensing Doctors, what are our must-dos that we've got to have done before Saturday?
My must-dos is, first of all, and actually there's a little checklist, I think, in the presentation there. First of all is to engage your IT supplier to find out what they've got. You might want to see what else is out there. I would recommend to show willing. I would recommend, and you decide to take this advice or not, I would recommend to register with SecureMed. Even if you don't have a software supplier, because it will ask you for your software supplier and you can leave it as none. Send it off and they'll send it back and say you haven't got a software supplier so you can't register, but you've shown that you're showing willing, you're showing effort, you've thought about it. I would probably, and whatever you call the document, I would probably raise, in my world I would raise a change control. So I'd be thinking about what changes do I have to make and how do I make sure those are safe? Thinking about the risk that we talked about before, having a little think about risk and benefit and all those other things, and think about open a change control. You can show then somebody, whatever they call the document, I'm sure in a GP practice probably called a different document, a risk assessment document, to say that we've assessed the risk, positive and negative, and we've moved on. You've got some documentation to show that you're thinking about FMD, that you're moving forward.
I would just like to say a couple of words. Number one, and I'm sure we would all pass our appreciation on to John for doing a great job in terms of demystifying FMD. Thank you. But I think, of course, any event of this nature only really works when those that are participating within it really kind of roll up their sleeves and get fully engaged. So I know it's one of those topics that probably brings a mixture of frustration, lack of clarity, misunderstanding, why the hell did we ever introduce this, etc. But hopefully what we've done is take you somewhere along that journey to giving that clarity. Our commitment is to keep driving that clarity out. So do look at the website for kind of where the latest information is. We'll keep it updated. I have taken away a couple of really good ideas. I think the patient poster is a really good one, and we will look very closely and very urgently at the SOPs bit that can probably help you at a practice level as well. As I said before, the key thing is about making these events work for you. So thank you all for your attention. Once you've done your feedback, you are welcome to head for the exits and head for that long driveway and safe journey home.